Welcome to Coming Clean, the podcast dedicated to common sense environmental dialogue, environmental optimism, and real environmental solutions. This show is proudly powered by Ørsted. Welcome back to Coming Clean with your host, Benji Backer. I am joined today by one of my good friends who also is probably one of the most, a politician that I look up to, which is very rare these days to look up to a politician, but he's somebody who I look up to a lot and somebody who I think is a hero to this country that has not been celebrated as much as he deserves, whether that's in the media or in politics. And he's really led from the front as a Republican congressman from Arkansas on issues of conservation, of public and private lands, of hunting and fishing, of climate change. And we're going to dive into all of that. But before he was active on these issues in Congress, he was on the University of Arkansas football team. He was a grad school student and graduate at the Yale School of Forestry. And now he is the chairman of the United States House of Natural Resources Committee and has a huge platform and a huge policy agenda that he's working on getting through with his colleagues and even across the aisle to protect our environment, boost our economy, and do all the things that this podcast has talked so much about. Congressman Bruce Westerman, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Benji, always great to be with you, and it's my favorite time of year. It's springtime. Turkey season starts Monday in Arkansas, so we're doing this early. I just got back in from the forest from scouting out turkeys, so I'm all pumped up and ready to go to talk about natural resources and how we need to be good stewards of the environment and take care of what we've got, and leave it in better shape than we found it.
Well, it's actually that passion, that personal passion that you have towards the issue that's probably the most inspiring part of it for me, because that's what brings me to this issue. But you have your own kind of personal story. I mean, right now you just got back from a morning out in nature, and I would love for you to talk about that. But I'd also love for you to talk about why, as you know, most people when they think of a politician, they think of suits and they think of kind of stuffy rooms, and you thrive the most when you're out in nature. You were out there this morning. What's your personal story of why you care so much about this and why it has been such a priority and why you lead on it in a time when not the Republicans haven't been known to lead on it, but it's not necessarily the issue that Republicans are always talking about first and foremost? Why is that not the case for you, and why is it so important?
Well, that's a great question, Benji. And I think it does go back to my upbringing and growing up in Arkansas. And some of the folks listening today may not be familiar with Arkansas, but our motto is the natural state. And if you've never been here, it's just a gorgeous place. I'm obviously biased towards it, but I live in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is a national park. It's in the Ouachita Mountains, the Ouachita National Forest. And I grew up in this environment. And when I was a kid, hunting and fishing were the things I did for my pastime. In school, I played sports, I hunted and I fished and was involved in the Future Farmers of America. And, that combined with what we did at church, that was pretty much what my life consisted of. So I've never lost that passion. I was sharing with my dad this morning about hearing some turkeys gobble. My little brother was out in another place and he heard turkeys gobble, and we're really anticipating the season opening Monday. And my dad said, I think my DNA affected you all with the disease for being outdoors. But I'm glad it did, because if you've never hiked up on a mountain before daylight and be there before first light, and you hear the birds start singing, you see the sun come up, and then you hear if you're a turkey hunter, you hear a turkey gobble, and it gets you all excited. But it's just, it's refreshing. I've been out traveling all week. I've been to California having hearings on water policy. I've been back to Texas. I've been out in my district. Even had a classified briefing. So, all of that going through my mind, but to get out on top of a mountain, out in nature, where you're just hearing the birds sing, seeing the sun come up, the beauty of spring, there's nothing better than that. So I want to make sure that my kids and my grandkids are able to have those same experiences. I want to make sure that we take care of the land that we have, take care of the the environment and the climate, and leave it in a better shape than we found it. And that really drives a lot of the policy decisions that I push.
And when did it really start to come to your mind that you had to marry that love of the environment that you grew up with? That story is just, I think, probably something that resonates with so many people. But when did you marry that love and that background with knowing that you had to be active on the policy side? What did that look like? Was that in college, undergrad, grad school? Was it when you ran for office? When did you start to realize that the policy side was so important? And when did you start to craft out your own agenda on this that maybe is different than what other people have heard of?
Yeah, well, it's part of who I am. So, my career started not with a political ambition. I'm an engineer. That's what I got my undergraduate in, and then I did forestry in graduate school. So my interaction with the environment and with nature wasn't a policy action for 25 years while I was out working in the private sector, but it's what I did in my spare time. I hunted, I fished, I took my kids fishing. It's not just a time to get away personally, but it's something that you do with family. We used to camp a lot. My kids enjoyed camping more when they were growing up than anything else. And we've got a beautiful lake where we can load the tent up in the boat and go out on an island and camp out there and fish and swim and just relax. So, I was just enjoying everything up until I got into the politics. And then I ran for a school board. You don't deal with a lot of environmental policy on the school board. And I got in the state legislature and, started getting more and more involved in it. But then when I got to Congress, I found out I'm the only forester in Congress. Forests play such a critical role in everything when we talk about clean air and clean water, and we talk about wildlife habitat. Forests are essential to that. Now I'm on the Natural Resources Committee, which we have jurisdiction over all the federal lands, the Park Service. I've got the Buffalo National River in my district, which is an amazing place. So I've had an opportunity to really expand what I work on, and the foundation I had with that that forestry degree from Yale. I've used that a whole lot more in politics than I ever realized that I would. So it's just kind of given me a platform to be there working on these issues that I can tell you when I went to graduate school, I had no idea I would be in Congress someday.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it seems obvious to us, but I think to a lot of listeners, it should be pretty remarkable that for most politicians in Congress, when they think of the environmental issues, they don't think of the environment first. They think of the politics around it. They think of the ramifications of the decisions from a political perspective. Where you stand very different is that when you think about environmental decisions and policies, you are thinking about the environment first because that's your background and that's where you come to this issue from. I just think of like Nancy Pelosi or AOC and others. When they think of this issue, they don't have that background that you have, and that's not to say that they don't care. It's a totally different perspective. And instead of thinking about it politics first, you're thinking the environment first. And I truly believe that is one of the reasons why the Republicans who have led on this have actually got the right approach, and that the solutions actually can work, because when you put the environment first and you have the background in forestry, or you have the background in agriculture, which so many of the members of Congress on the right have these backgrounds on these relevant topics before they became members of Congress. I think that is a very distinct difference between the way that Republicans and Democrats look at this. Other than that, I guess, would you agree with that? But also, other than that, what do you think that the Republican and Democrat approaches are, and what's different about them for a listener that might say, yeah, I love the environment. That's why, I see the Democrats leading on this. What's the Republican approach? What's different about it? And why do you feel like that is a better approach?
I'm a conservative. I'm a proud conservative. And I think that makes me a better conservationist, because the word conservation is derived from conservative. Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican, who was conservative, was the father of conservation. And you and I've talked about this before, but there's a philosophical definition of a conservative as someone who believes in unchosen responsibilities or unchosen obligations. And as a conservative, I look back on history and I see the things that have happened in this country that have given us great wealth, that have given us great opportunities, that have given us innovation. I look at our Constitution, and I'm a proud defender of our Constitution, and I say, I have an obligation to what people who've come before me have done, but also looking to the future, I have an obligation to the future. And a true conservative wants to conserve. That doesn't mean preserve. And there's a big distinction between preservation and conservation. And when you're talking about especially the living environment, you can't preserve it. Preservation is for artwork. It's for an old historic building. It's something that's innate, but nature is alive. It changes all the time. Forests are continually changing. And to be a conservationist, you use what you've got, but you leave it in a better shape than how you found it for future generations. And yeah, you talked about backgrounds of members of Congress. The engineering work that I did, where I actually dealt with permits, and I saw the complexity of that, and some of it's very nonsensical. I mean, you can achieve the objectives in a lot less time and a lot more effectively, and you can get more things done. I say we can have a strong environment and a strong economy at the same time, and the two go hand in hand. And there seems to be this mindset that if you want a healthy environment, you have to break your economy to do that. But look around the world, look where the best environments are, and you also have strong economies because people have extra resources to devote to doing things right and taking care of the environment around us.
And I think that preservation, conservation dichotomy is one of the biggest differences, to your point. I mean, the left often sees this as, this hands-off approach. And, in a perfect world, if humans weren't around and we weren't having an impact on our environment constantly by just simply living, everything we do takes resources in some way, shape, or form from the environment. If we weren't on this planet, which is obviously not something that we want, then preservation would be the only option. But because we are, and because we're constantly having an impact, and because we're constantly using resources and trying to also balance the protection of the environment at the same time, conservation is really the only way forward. It's something that I write about in my book coming up. It's something that I think one of the coolest stories was a tribal leader in a very successful native tribe on the West Coast told me that the only reason they've been able to restore the salmon population in the river that goes to their tribe is because they have the financial resources to put the money into salmon restoration. And if they were worrying about keeping their economy afloat or struggling with drugs and alcohol problems and the things that a lot of the tribes struggle with, then they wouldn't be able to put that money towards salmon restoration. And I think that it shows the broader point that the countries, the states, the places where the economy is doing well, the environment is well protected, and there is a direct correlation there. That might have not always been true in like the Industrial Revolution and everything, but with the information we have today, with the demand of people to protect the environment today, you need those economic resources to provide an environmentally beneficial resource in protecting the environment. In addition to conservation and preservation, you guys have been working on a pretty large policy agenda as Republicans in the House, ranging from a wide array of topics. But what other kind of differences are there between a right and left approach? And how does that apply to how you're seeing the policy issues unfold right now in Congress?
Yeah, you're talking about the bill that we dubbed H.R. 1, saying this is the most important bill to the Republican conference in the House. So H.R. 1 was called the Lower Energy Cost Act. And when you're talking about environment and climate, energy is a huge, huge component of that. And I contend that what the policy we have in H.R. 1 is, again, both better for the environment and better for the economy. And you have to take a macro approach to it. You have to look at the real facts and the real data, and you can't just make these decisions based on emotion and make them in a vacuum. You know, if it were a perfect world, we would have all the carbon-free electricity that everybody could use, an endless supply, and we wouldn't emit any carbon into the atmosphere. But that's not realistic. It's not something that can apply to our world today. You know, America's done a much better job of cutting our carbon emissions, but there's a developing world out there that's building more carbon emitting systems every day, and they're building them faster than we can reduce carbon emissions here in America. So if you look at it on a macro scale, how do you affect this globally? And the key, I think, always comes back to innovation. We have to be the ones that innovate, but it has to be innovation that's economically sound. It can't be a government subsidy that will possibly work here in America, but it's not going to work in India. It's not going to work in China. It's not going to work in developing African countries because they don't have the subsidies to pay. Plus, my opinion is when you subsidize technology, you're subsidizing away innovation. Instead of having the market motivate people to create better innovation, you're subsidizing the current technology because you can get an economic return with the current technology. And we also know that when you produce energy in America, we do it cleaner and safer and more efficiently than any place else in the world. When we use the energy that we produce here, you don't have to transport it as far. And we also know that when you convert coal-fired plants to gas-fired plants, just because of the thermal efficiency and the combustion efficiency of natural gas and the efficiency of a turbine, you're automatically getting less carbon emissions per unit output of electricity. So those are the kinds of things that we can do to make our energy sector cleaner. At the same time, we've got to focus on new technologies. There's a lot of wind and solar being built that has its own issues. That's why our bill not only covered oil and gas extraction, it also covered mineral extraction. The demand for minerals globally is just phenomenal. You know, the statistic I like to use is the World Bank statistic that in the next 25 years, we need to mine more copper than has been mined in the history of the world. Well, America has been blessed with those deposits of not just copper, but basically every kind of mineral and element there is. Yet China is controlling about 63%, almost 2/3 of the world's mineral supply. And in some of those rare earth elements and critical minerals, they're 90 to 95% of the global supply. And they've gone out and hoarded these resources. So when we pass policies to subsidize electrification, and we're not producing not just the mining and the refining, but also the manufacturing of these goods, we end up exporting our wealth to a country like China, who is not following environmental guidelines. They're the ones that are building a coal-fired plant, about one a week, 38 gigawatts in a year of coal power that they built. So our actions have an impact. And it just keeps getting worse when you look at the Chinese supply of minerals, the cobalt in the cell phone that I'm doing this Zoom on. It more than likely came from a Chinese mine in the Congo with child slave labor digging out aggregates of cobalt and putting it in a container to ship to China and make batteries with it. We've got cobalt in America, but we've also got a not in my backyard mentality that says we don't want to disturb our areas. We don't want to do the mining the way that we do it, which is better than anybody else in the world, with absolutely no human rights violations, without with the strongest environmental standards. If we're going to do all this electrification, why wouldn't we use the minerals and elements that we have here? And Benji, this just goes on and on. I can tell you example after example with different elements. So I think there's a smart approach to making a transition and being more innovative. And we haven't even talked about forestry and biochar and biofuels and things like that. I'm very, very bullish on. which again, we're blessed with resources in that area as well.
Yeah, I would love to get to that, but before we do, I think just to add on to what you were saying, the innovation side is really what's missing because we don't have all the solutions to these issues. And you're right. I mean, there's no subsidy or government regulation that will solve this because this is a global problem. And a country like India or China, they're not going to put those same subsidies and regulations and or pay more for the solutions. They're going to do what is the best for them economically and the cheapest. And it's only innovation and coming up with innovative technologies that will lower the costs to where a developing country will prefer the cleaner option. But until that happens, there is no chance that they're going to prioritize it. And we need to be doing that innovation technology here at home. And instead, we've been relying on a very government heavy approach when the innovation is really what we need. And, short and long term provides the biggest benefit. To move towards that forest management piece and the biochar piece, very few people in my generation, I think, know the negative impact that our lack of forest management has had on our environment and on our forests, but also the positive environmental impact that forest management could have. Can you talk through kind of why that is a huge, huge priority for you? What sort of impacts could be had if we did forest management right, and what you plan on doing about that during your time as chairman of House Natural Resources, but also what you have been doing for the past few years to solve this problem that, again, very few people know about?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back first to Teddy Roosevelt again, who called forests the lungs of the earth. And then take people back on the trek to their middle school or junior high science class where they learned about photosynthesis, where plants breathing carbon dioxide, if you will, and they take that carbon dioxide and strip the carbon out and combine it with the hydrogen out of water, and they make hydrocarbons that they store in the tree. And they release oxygen back into the air. So we literally couldn't survive without photosynthesis and without the service that plants do, and trees being by far the largest component of biomass on the above ground on the planet. So they are the tool that eats carbon, and they store the carbon until the tree is cut down, and it either burns or it decomposes. If it burns, it's releasing carbon dioxide. If it decomposes, it's releasing CH4 or methane. So what we want to do, and what I'm proposing to do, is to maximize the amount of storage in wood and in forest, and that's the one key thing where we can get carbon out of the atmosphere that's been put in the atmosphere. So it starts with healthy forest management, and we've allowed our forest, especially in the West, to go unmanaged. There's the perfect example that I think everybody will get, and it's in our giant sequoia trees. So there are about 37,000 acres of giant sequoias on the planet. They all grow on the western slope of the Sierra Nevadas at about 4,500 feet of elevation. They grow in these very distinct groves. There's about 70 groves out there. And when I was in forestry school, and I think up until just a few years ago, people thought there was no way you could lose a giant sequoia tree in a fire. It's like they were built for fire. The bark on some of these monarch trees is like 2 feet thick. So it's just like an insulating material God put around the base of the tree. And but in a matter of 2 or 3 years, we lost 20% of our giant sequoias to catastrophic wildfire. And when you look at the science, how did that happen? The way it happened was we after the gold rush in California, Native Americans really cut back on doing the controlled burns. And then the Forest Service came along in early 1900, and they thought you wanted to suppress all the fire. That was the management regime they put in place. So if you look at the historical record, which a tree, because of its annual rings, is like a living history book, you can see that for millennia that these sequoia groves averaged about 31 fires per century. So every 3 or so years, you had a low intensity fire that would come through and clean up the underbrush in the forest. And you had this more of a open, tall canopy forest. Well, there's a tree called a white fir. It's shade tolerant, which means it'll grow up in the shade. But when you got a fire coming through every 3 years or so, it burns down these little white fir trees. Well, you suppress fire for 100 to 150 years, and these little white fir trees become 100-foot tall plus trees. And just by the shape of their limbs and everything, the crown goes right down to the ground. And the fire comes through, it hits one of these white fir trees, and it climbs the tree. It's what we call a ladder fuel. It gets into the canopy, and you catch the canopy of a sequoia tree on fire, and you can kill the tree. And, I've visited out in California and seen the devastation of a whole grove of sequoias. Just as far as the eye can see, all you're seeing are tall black matchsticks where these forests have been destroyed by wildfire. So I apologize for the in-depth discussion.
This is exactly what we need.
But the solution's easy. You go in and you cut down these white fir trees. There's some pine trees that do the same thing. You reintroduce fire to the ecosystem out there, and you take these forests back to how they've lived for thousands of years. Some of these sequoias are 3,200 years old. These are amazing species of trees. They're the most iconic tree on the planet. So we did the hard work. We went out and had a field hearing. Ironically, most of these sequoia groves are in Kevin McCarthy's district, but we did a bipartisan field hearing. We got out there with the Forest Service, with the Park Service. We got out there with the scientists. There's the Tule River tribe. They've got sequoias on their reservation. The state of California's got some sequoias. So we kind of brought everybody to the table, the community, and said, look, here's the facts. Here's a solution to fix this. And as a result, we've got a bill called the Save Our Sequoias Act that last Congress, it had 25 Democrat, 25 Republican sponsors. It was endorsed by the Save the Redwoods League. It was endorsed by the Nature Conservancy and the Environmental Defense Fund and about 90 other environmental groups who said this is the right thing to do. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that bill out of committee in the last Congress, but we'll be refiling it on Arbor Day this year. And I know the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee pretty well, and I can almost guarantee you that bill is going to get out of the committee. And it's very important to the speaker, so I'm pretty sure it'll have its day on the floor of the House, and I believe it's got great support in the Senate as well. So we could see some real sound forestry management put in place on the most iconic stands of trees on the planet. And what a great example it will be for the public when they visit the Sequoia National Park or Sequoia National Forest to go in and see real forestry management and the benefits of it. And I can promise you there's not going to be any clear cutting involved. It's going to be thinning from below, taking this ladder fuel out, creating a scenario where the fire can drop down when it comes through. And one of the best things about this, Benji, is the Forest Service has known this, and they actually did some of this management. And we had a fire that went through last year or the year before, and it hit one of these groves where they had done the management, and the fire did exactly what it was supposed to do. It dropped down low, went across the ground, burning the underbrush. So it's not like there's any question of, is this the right thing to do? It's the academics agree this is the right thing to do. But you're going to have some environmental groups come out and say, no, you shouldn't. We got to preserve these forests. And again, you can't preserve them. You can conserve them, and because they're changing. They grow until the trees fill up the growing space. Then they start competing for light. They compete for nutrients, and they compete for water. And one of those is going to get limited, so your trees are going to get weaker, and that's when you get disease and infestations, and you get too much biomass per acre, and fire comes through, and you've just got so much fuel there that you get fires that are larger than fires you've seen before. So, even in a world of changing weather and changing climate, we can still manage our forest to thrive in the environment in which these trees are placed.
Well, it's truly imperative that we do that. And I think, one of the questions I was going to ask was, why are people against it? But I think you alluded to the fact that, there's this kind of utopian feel good. We can't do anything to the forest, but let them do what they need to do. But like you said, they're ever changing, partially due to humans. And the best thing we can do is go in and actively manage and conserve these places so that we have giant sequoias for the future for a whole host of benefits. And I do think that people don't realize that a state like California, which has not prioritized forest management because they want to do this preservation mindset, this isn't just something that Bruce Westerman and Benji Becker are talking about that isn't real. This is scientific. This is scientifically proven. California destroyed all of the emissions reductions they had in 22 years with one summer of forest fires that could have been so much less pervasive than they were if they would have done the forest management. And so the CO2 output of not conserving these forests, on top of the ecological damage, the wildlife damage, all the damage that comes from that, the lack of ability for the forest to store the carbon after it's been burned, all those negative impacts on top of the CO2 increases of not managing our forests actively. It's definitely something that, you have led on and doesn't get enough attention. We hear a lot about EVs and solar panels and all these things. And one of the most important things that we can do to protect our environment and reduce emissions is to protect our forests, to build and grow more forests, which is also something you've worked on. And if we had more time, I would love to dive into Trillion Trees, which if people who are listening haven't heard of that, it's an amazing, amazing piece of policy. That's a global kind of effort that Congressman Westerman has led here in the United States. But with the limited time that we have and knowing your leadership on this issue, on forests, on conservation, on climate, I know you work a lot on the energy stuff with your colleagues like Catherine Morris Rogers. Where do you see, this is kind of my final question, knowing that we're up against time, but where do you see the conservative movement going on this issue? Where do you want it to go? Where does it ideally go? And what role do you think the conservative movement should have on environmental climate issues going forward? How big of a priority, and what does that look like?
I think it should always be a priority, and it should always be based on science, and it should be based on the reality of the world. You can't take science alone and say carbon's bad for the atmosphere, therefore we're going to emit no carbon. That's an unrealistic approach. We could, even if the federal government in America was to make that regulation, that's not going to change developing countries from emitting carbon. So we got to focus on technology, and we've got to focus on solutions that work and on solutions that have the biggest impact. I would call that the low-hanging fruit. And having healthy forests in America is really the lowest hanging fruit. And there's so much more benefits other than just carbon removal and storage and sequestration. It's beneficial to watersheds. It's beneficial to wildlife habitat. It's beneficial for outdoor recreation. There's no downside to a healthy forest, and we should be doing such a much better job with our federal lands on the forest. And then there's, I say trees are an old solution to new problems, but if I can talk just a minute about biochar and where that fit in, and also using wood more as a construction material, because when you sustainably harvest a forest, and what I mean by sustainably harvesting is that at the end of the day, there's more, you're not cutting more than the growth. So you think forests are going to grow every year, and what you harvest out of the forest is less than the growth. So you're not removing any more trees or carbon than what can grow in a year. And as you thin these forests out, they can actually grow faster and store more carbon in a larger tree. But when we use these timber products, and we've got some new technology called mass timber construction, where you can actually build skyscrapers out of wood. And this table that I'm sitting at, it's a wooden table. 50% of the weight of this table is carbon. And it's carbon that was stored in the wood that the tree that this came from produced photosynthesis on years and years ago. And this carbon is locked up in the wood for as long as this table's here. So you can think of this table as a carbon battery. Because where this tree was harvested, another one grew up and started pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere, and we're storing this carbon.
Wow.
And think of a skyscraper as a carbon battery.
Right.
So start envisioning our buildings and structures and furniture, not just as the purpose they serve for housing and shelter, but also as a carbon battery that stores carbon better than any other method that we can come up with from an engineering standpoint. So you got that going, but you also have residuals when you process this timber. You've got forests that are overstocked, that have low value biomass in it that needs to come out. And that's where I think biochar is a great product that, again, biochar is an old product. The Incans made biochar in the Amazon, and you can go dig it up. That was put there over 1,000 years ago. So the cool thing about biochar is it's almost pure carbon. It's a soil amendment that makes the soil hold water and nutrients better and makes those nutrients and water more available for plant uptake. So you think about the arid West where we've got overgrown forests. If you could take this biomass out, make biochar out of it, people could purchase the biochar for a carbon credit, donate it to a farmer or a rancher to put it in the soil. You can even put it back on the forest floor, and it's going to be there. So it gives you a known quantity, long-lasting carbon sequestration that the market is dying to have that. There's billions of dollars sitting out there wanting to invest in carbon sequestration, but finding that right product is really hard to do. And the accounting on biochar would be easy. And plus, in the arid West, if you make the soil, the agriculture soil, more productive from a water and nutrient standpoint, you get all of those benefits that go with it as well. And then the byproduct when you make biochar is you heat wood without oxygen, you drive the moisture out, and then you start driving off volatiles out of the wood that come off as a syngas. The syngas is used to drive the process, but you get excess syngas that you can condense that into liquid transportation fuel. So now you're really talking about some big impacts. I met with an airline this week that they would buy all of the renewable woody biomass fuel they could buy if it was just available to purchase. So that's why the Biochar Act, the Trillion Trees Act, all focuses on innovation and research on how you make these products, and you make a product that the market wants, that you don't have to say, here's a subsidy to go make this. You make it and the market will come. And that's what changes the rest of the world. Not that our energy is the cleanest, but it's the most reliable and the most affordable. And by the way, it's the cleanest kind of energy. So people are going to purchase technology based on reliability and affordability. And our innovation can make it the cleanest on top of that.
I think that's the perfect approach that to end on, that I think really explains what the conservative approach is. And what I love about it is that these are a lot of topics that people haven't heard about. This, biochar, I spoke at the National Biochar Conference in West Virginia last year. People don't hear about biochar. They don't hear about forest management. They don't hear about giant sequoias, and they don't hear about, a lot of topics that you have tons of value to add on the conversation, on the agriculture side, on the innovation side, and on the energy side. We've only touched the surface of where we can make progress, but this is the sort of approach that people need to hear about, and the world needs to hear about, because, like you said, you can't make it clean truly, because it will never be adopted if it's not reliable and affordable. And I love and appreciate, and I think America should appreciate how much that has been a central theme of your and so many other of your colleagues' agendas and what you're doing to lead from the front on that. Before we go, I have 3 rapid fire fun questions that I think you'll enjoy answering. And
can I make one? Can I make one plug
absolutely.
before you answer those? So I'm probably old enough to be the father of most of your listeners here. Maybe not. And I'm pretty social media averse. My staff runs my official social media, but I'm gonna plug one social media because you're talking about biochar and other issues. But you can go on LinkedIn and you can join all these forums and you can get the scientific research and find out what the latest thing is that's happening on in biochar, on forest management, mass timber construction, and I found that very beneficial and educational. It's kind of my kind of social media. So
you just search biochar and that information on LinkedIn and a whole host of stuff will come up?
Yeah, and you can follow that. When new articles are published, you can go in and read about biochar, and you can really take a deep dive. It's amazing the amount of knowledge that's out there and the way that we can share knowledge anymore. And, it's probably more beneficial to society than cat videos or something.
Well, cat videos are beneficial when you're in bed and you're trying not to sleep. Learning about biochar is great when you're trying to solve a complex global challenge. So I can agree with you on that. Interestingly enough, my girlfriend found me on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn may be on the comeback for education and dating. It's a whole host of new bounds here that LinkedIn probably didn't realize they were going to have. But that's really great to know, and we can put some resources about the LinkedIn kind of biochar community when we post this podcast. But with the limited time that we have left, I know you've got to run. You've got really busy things really important things to do in a busy day. I want to know 3 quick questions. What's your favorite tree?
Shortleaf pine tree, Pinus echinata. That's the favorite evergreen. Gymnosperm. My favorite hardwood tree is white oak, Quercus alba.
Love that. Okay. Second, who's your least favorite SEC team?
Ooh, the one the Razorbacks are playing, but it's probably Texas A&M, because I played at Arkansas back when we were in the Southwest Conference, and Texas A&M was a rival back then. But Texas and Oklahoma are coming into the SEC, and there's just this natural Arkansas-Texas thing. So when UT gets in, it'll be easy to say who the least favorite rival is, or who the biggest rival is. You go to these schools; these are all great schools, and I know great people that have come from all of them. But there's Arkansas and Texas is a long old rivalry that I'm looking forward to getting renewed.
Yeah, reviving that will be a lot of fun. And then the last question is, where is your favorite national forest in the country? And why is it your favorite?
Oh, that's a softball there, Benji. It's the Ouachita National Forest, because it's where I live, it's where I grew up, and there's just something special about it. But I can tell you, I love visiting our national forest across the country. It's heartbreaking sometimes when I see how mismanaged some of these forests are, but also see some silver lining around the clouds. Especially here in the Ouachita, which is one of the better managed forests in the country. And a lot of that has to do with the public acceptance of harvesting timber and doing the thinning operations. They've done a great project that I wish I could take everybody to see, where to save the red-cockaded woodpecker, which was an endangered species, they went in and converted the lots of acres in the Ouachita National Forest back to pre-European conditions, which are more of a savanna type forest with widely spaced open forest type, where you introduce fire every 3 to 5 years. You get a lot of vegetative early successional habitat. When they did this, they not only, in an area where they had to relocate red-cockaded woodpeckers to, they now trap red-cockaded woodpeckers and relocate them to other areas. There's also more quail, more turkeys, more deer. and the plant biodiversity went through the roof because all this seed bank had been hidden under the duff and the overstocked forest. When they thinned it out and burned, they just got a flush of vegetation. So, I wish I could take everybody to see that. One thing that I'm looking forward to in May is the Natural Resources Committee is going to take a field trip up to New Haven, Connecticut, and meet with it's now the Yale School of the Environment, but they've got about an 8,000 to 10,000 acre forest that we're going to go out. I would say it's the oldest managed forest with records on it in North America. It's going to be a bipartisan trip, and I just want people to go look at it and say, why could our national forest not look like this? If we would just apply the science, our 192 million acres of national forest could look like this.
Well, Congressman, we could talk a really long time about the bipartisan efforts that you're doing, all the other topics that we didn't even get to. We've got to leave it there. I like to think of you as the real life version of the Lorax, but in a way that is good for the environment and good for people simultaneously. And so I appreciate the real life Lorax, the 21st century Lorax, the one that is balancing all of the things that we need for our economy and our environment. I appreciate you taking the time to join this podcast to tell young people about what this approach looks like. And most importantly, something that I will remember, and hopefully all future generations remember, is your leadership on this. It's truly appreciated, and it's been a blessing to be your friend and ally. ACC is lucky to have you as an ally, and excited for our work together and what's to come.
Well, thanks for telling the story, Benji, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to come on and visit with your listeners. What you're doing is so important because we've got to get the word out. We've got to make people think about this stuff, not just take the headlines and the talking points, but to dig into the science to understand what's really happening and what's the logical decision, what's the common sense decision, what's the policy that's going to make the environment and the economy better for the future and give people better lives.
Well, you're welcome back on the show anytime to keep telling that story. We're going to keep telling it too, and we'll definitely have you on again and hopefully see you potentially next week, and excited to see you soon and spend more time together. And thanks again for your leadership.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
Thank you. And before we jump, the Coming Clean podcast is grateful to be powered by Ørsted, a wonderful company strengthening America's energy security with reliable and domestic clean energy. Through its integrated renewable energy solutions, Ørsted is creating American jobs, investing in American communities, and driving American innovation, all while preserving our country's natural habitats. A clean energy future truly connects us all, and Ørsted is helping lead the charge. To learn more, visit us.orsted.com.